Welcome to the book club in space. I'm your host, Dustin Jones. Thank you for joining me today. This is the first of what's hopefully going to be a Twitch YouTube streaming series where I try to do a book club online. So this is going to be the first attempt. So thank you so much for joining me. It is going to be an all sci-fi book club, so if you can't tell from the visuals, that's our goal here. And we started with Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. It was published by Tor in 1985, and I happened to audiobook this novel, and for me, the audiobook has all these silly like space zooms and gizmos and gadgets at the beginning and the end, and it kind of really inspired me to do this kind of 8-bit old school sci-fi, almost kind of 80s vibe. So I hope you enjoy it. It's silly, and I hope it takes us in a place where we feel a little bit more sci-fi for a short digestible bit, which is what I hope these things are. I'm going to try to keep them short. I'm going to talk about 3 things that really appealed to me that are like overall themes that I think the novel brought up. I'm going to talk about a couple things stylistically, and in the future, hopefully, we'll have a chat that I can kind of do a little Q&A response question. We can share thoughts and discuss together, and that's going to be it. So we're going to shoot for somewhere under the half-hour mark. It's probably going to be between 15 and 20 minutes, if I had to guess. So let's kind of get rolling. I'll start with a short summary of the book. There are going to be spoilers. I am going to talk about the book in its entirety. So if you haven't watched, hit the like button or the notification button, and that way, when you have taken in the full book or audiobook or however you're doing it, you can come back and watch around and hopefully get something from it or have something to think on for fun. In short, our story revolves around Ender Wiggin. He is a brilliant child. He never gets past his teenage years in the first book, which is solely what I'm talking about. I haven't read any of the others in the series. It is a series. And Ender is the lukewarm between the hot and cold of his older eldest brother, Peter, and his older sister, Valentine. And Peter is the absurdly aggressive, hungry for power child, and Valentine is kind of Ender's sole emotional connection that he has in the world. As we get through the book, we find out that he's actually intentionally isolated by the people who are controlling him. In short, to make a little bit more sense, the story of Ender's Game is Ender's story of how he goes from being a brilliant child who's being monitored by the government to controlling a fleet and defeating an alien race of enemies. So to kind of pull that back, Ender, as a child, has this monitor on his back. He's watched by the government because everyone in his family is brilliant. The Valentine seems too meek or mild to be a commander of a fleet, and Peter seems way too aggressive. It is Ender's goal in his life to not end up like Peter, and his greatest fear throughout the novel is that every time he does something violent, he seems to be becoming closer and closer to Peter. And this is kind of a recurring theme for him, and kind of one of the things we understand about Ender's motivations as he moves through the world. And then with his older sister, she's his connection. He has a couple friends that he meets in military school, but he's often intentionally distanced by the commanders of the military school because they feel like that is how you make the best leader of war, which is kind of an interesting theme on its own. But the themes I found most enjoyable or most interesting to kind of dive into and think about while I was reading, there are 3 of them. The first is the concept of children in war, or a war between generations. The buggers are bad guys. At first, they are just our classic monstrous bad guys. They don't really have identities. The humans don't know anything about them. They're just bad, and they want to kill everyone on Earth. We find out there's actually a lot more to that later on in the story, but I'll get to that as one of my other themes. But at first, we've got children who are being raised up by the generation before them, who think that the the buggers are out to get him, and they don't know anything about the buggers except they're bad, but they're being brought up and taught to kill these things. And I think Ender's game does a pretty good job of having Ender kind of question. He doesn't directly question why he's in the war, but he kind of directly questions if there is an impending, invasion number 2 on Earth. He's like, well, are they actually coming? Do we have to kill them all? But they isolate him so he can't think about the well-being of the buggers, and they intentionally use propaganda and videos to not show buggers having any humanistic things. They want everyone in the military school to feel like the buggers are just a hive mind bad guy. So yeah, Ender is constantly stuck between fighting a battle in a war that he's only been told things about, but he doesn't get the full information. He doesn't get to make a full choice. And I kind of wonder if Orson Scott Card also kind of feels like that about wars that are real here on Earth. Sorry, I had to take a little space juice to keep my throat going. We also have this idea of the isolation of the enemy within war that I think Orson Scott Card does a really good job at. And for most of the novel, the buggers are bad guys that are just they could be a stock villain. They could be anything. In this one, they look like bugs, thus buggers. But they could be any bad guy. It's not till the very end of the novel where Ender is holding like a pod where he has the chance to maybe restart the entire bugger species that we realize that they have like this telekinetic link even between humans, and Ender's like the first human that they've been able to figure out how to reach out to because they don't verbally talk. They don't use like muscle vocal cords to talk. And Ender realizes and becomes privy to the information that the buggers are a lot more than just bad guys. They have wants and needs and desires for their species, and they want peace, and there is a chance for universal happiness between the two intelligent species. I think that's a really cool comment by Orson Scott Card. It kind of shows the concept that if humans would decide to talk to their enemies, maybe more often we'd be able to achieve peace instead of violence. We also, one of the third themes that I found really interesting, I feel like I'm going to sneeze, so sorry if I do, is brilliance. And Ender is absurdly brilliant. That's why he's picked, that's why he's special, that's why he goes on to lead the armies, but his brilliance is used as a tool by the people in power around him. His brilliance, you feel him kind of questioning. Now, I don't know if it's implicit, I can't remember if he straight up says this comment about his brilliance, but he's often saying, it doesn't matter anymore. My life doesn't matter anymore. What I'm doing doesn't matter anymore. My decisions don't want to matter anymore, because the people who are in power, the adults, the people who control this, they're going to get what they want. And I'm just going to either quit or go along with it. Those are my two choices. And I think that's a really interesting concept on brilliance, because I feel like sometimes maybe the people who could break the norm, who are exceptional, often just kind of get pushed into the sieve of this is what you do, this is what is required of you, and their brilliance never truly gets a chance to shine unless it's in the pathway of those who have power, which I thought was a really cool comment by Orson Scott Card, or something you can bring out, whether it's intentional or not. That's always up in the air. Couple comments on stylistic choices. One of the really interesting things I found about the novel was the slang talk. Now, I listened to this through audiobook, so the narrative choice was to really emphasize the slang talk between the children at the military school and the teens at the military school. It's almost kind of like this Brooklyn street talk thing mixed with Bob Marley reggae. At least that's how it's narrated and what I listened to. I'm curious if you read the book with your eyes, the paper version, if you felt like there is a really large difference between like Ender's internal monologue or the slang dialect that's used up in the spaceship, because I found it really interesting. It's almost kind of like like a yo bugga is like how the audiobook is narrated. I know that sounds terrible, but it's very abrasive when you first hear it, and by the end of the book, like you're kind of expecting it when they talk to each other, and they even almost, the characters almost use the slang ironically to each other. At least that's how that's presented in the audiobook. So I'd be really interested to kind of go back and forth between the two. Another stylistic choice was, I was very curious, even though this is science fiction, there seemed to be some big liberties with the science part. I don't know if like inertia and gravity work the way Orson Scott Card wanted it to when he was writing this book. Now that's a literal statement. I really don't know. I'm not a scientist. I'm not good at math at all. It may, and he may have done research, but it kind of seemed very against how I would think inertia works, like when they're swinging around the star boxes, how they were like building up speed to a really high percentage. I don't know. I don't know enough about space, but it kind of felt like that was probably a fictionalization of science, which is absolutely okay. It makes it fun, but you know, I just want to throw that out where I feel like there were some fun liberties taken with the sci-fi part, more so than an attempt to really make a fictional setting among like scientific facts. I could be wrong, so if I am, comment in the chat. I know nothing about physics. I know very little about geometry even, so just let me know. That's just one of my weak spots. It just seemed kind of counterintuitive. I would love to know either way. Also, and the last thing that I wanted to bring up about Orson Scott Card's like stylistic things is like gaming. For a book published in 1985, this book says quite a bit about gaming. Gaming is a part of Ender's psychological development journey or manipulation with the games that happen at his desk, and we also see that in a larger thing in like the arcade style game rooms that the older commanders go to at the military school. So it seems like Orson Scott Card wanted to say something about psychology and gaming, but for me personally, I wasn't quite clear what his message was about that. Maybe he didn't have a specific message, he just thought it was cool because it's the 80s and arcades and sci-fis and all kind of just smashes together, and that could be absolutely the truth. But I feel like there is like a subtextual layer we can get to there, but I don't know how deep it goes, or if we should, if that's something that's going to be really valuable. But it's fun to think about, so if you have any thoughts on Ender's Game and the gamification of life, you know, it's in the title, so there is some intent there with what is Ender's Game. Now we do find out that, you know, the big surprise of the story at the end, so this is the big spoiler, so if you're still watching, this will ruin it. Ender's Game, when he goes to the final school, it's not actually a game. When he's playing space robots, you know, and he's in the ship, he's actually killing real living things, and he's actually winning the war. So that's the big spoiler, and you know, it also shows the kind of ends justify the means feel of the humans versus the buggers, who at the end seem way more universal and want way more peace. The humans seem almost more like the bad guys than the buggers do at the end of the book. Not totally, but the humans have operated in a huge moral gray area, and we're shown that time and time again throughout the book. But Ender is never given the decision to kill living things. He just does. Every time that he hurts or kills someone, he doesn't realize he's doing it. And I think that preserves the childlike quality about him, but at the same time, like, he's never allowed to make decisions that would matter and influence his future life. So really interesting when you kind of start folding that back into the brilliance and the role of generations and children of war. There's a lot going on in Ender's Game on top of, or underneath, this really, really fun sci-fi lasers, you know, blast them in spaceships feel, which is why I really enjoyed it, and I think that's the last comment I'll end on. You know, though it may be the most or least valuable depending on how you think about books, whether you liked it or not, I really liked it a lot. I loved how campy this was. I love the slang. After I got used to it, it was kind of like mold. It grew on me. I thought it was really fun and an enjoyable thing, and I'm glad I interfaced with it. So tell me what you guys did in the comments. On top of that, I just want to thank everyone for watching. This has been really fun. Hopefully it's been fairly short and digestible for us all, and we'll see you next week with another sci-fi book. I'm thinking about maybe George Lucas's first Star Wars book to see how Lucas was as a writer and how that translates to the movies. So it could be fun. Ender's Game also has a movie, by the way. I haven't watched it. I think it came out in 2013. So if you need more Ender's Game and you don't want to read the next part of the series, maybe going to the movie is something worthwhile. I don't think he got that great of a critical reception, but hey, could be fun. All right, thanks for watching.